Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call the meeting to order, that being the special council meeting of the Warwick Township Council, October 30th, 2023. And of course, we're starting today at 3:30. I'll remind council of disclosure of pecuniary interest or conflict of interest. Does anybody have one they want to declare at this time? Seeing none, thank you. I'd also like to welcome everybody joining us through YouTube today. And now I'd like to do the acknowledgement of ancestral lands. We acknowledge that the land on which we are gathered here today, Township of Warwick, is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, as well as the many Indigenous nations in Ontario whose footsteps have marked them for centuries. We also wish to acknowledge that we are situated on Treaty 29 and Treaty 25 territories signed by Chippewa chiefs and offer our respect and gratitude for these lands. I'm going to go to 5 on the agenda, and that's councillor commitments and items. We'll start with councillor commitment dates first. I'm going to start with councillor Westgate. Did you have anything to update us on, councillor? Councillor Morris?
No, I have nothing.
Deputy Mayor Kallenberg?
Nothing to add at this time.
Councillor Manning?
I have nothing to add.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to go to councillor items then, if I could, and I'll do a reverse fashion this time. Councillor Manning, did you have anything today for council?
I have nothing.
Deputy Mayor Kallenberg?
Yeah, just wondering what the old office is being utilized for. I just wonder if there may be an opportunity for some rental income if we could rent the office out, or I don't know what's being done there. I'm just asking the question and bring it up. So
I think probably Ryan, do you want to take this one or do you want me to give it to Amanda? Amanda, if you'd be so kind.
Thanks, Mayor Case and Councillor Kallenberg. Great question. The office, or the former office, is currently being utilized to support our Parks and Public Works operation. So the previous open office area is being used as a lunch and meeting space, but there is some, and the offices are being, I'll say, lightly used. There is some surplus space, being a former meeting room and office, a smaller office area. If council did want to explore looking at renting out that building or other opportunities, certainly we could do that. It would entail some sort of arrangement or agreement at minimum regarding use of the kitchen space, which is quite small. The separation of spaces would need to be looked at, and perhaps some renovation to provide those kinds of meeting and lunch facilities to Public Works. Thank you.
So good question, Councillor Kallenberg. And that's something I guess maybe we could have that discussion during the budget deliberations, if that was something you were thinking of, Councillor. Seems like we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty with our cameras right now. We'll see if we can't work it through. Obviously, we'd like the camera to be on the people that are speaking. Councillor Morris, did you have anything for today?
just one thing, I mentioned to Amanda earlier, I'm getting a few questions about the backwater or back block valve, check valve, grant. Now, people are asking, so Amanda advised them to contact the township office. Is this, there's no money, if I understand right, there's no money available today until budget? Is that my understanding?
Amanda, do you want to take this or do you want Andrew to take it? Andrew, please.
Thank you. Yeah, at the last council meeting, I believe it was decided that the money will be available as part of next year's council deliberations, but a reminder to everybody to make sure that they just, you know, these, if they have the work done ahead of time, make sure there's a plumbing permit and they save all the receipts from their licensed plumber that either installs the backflow preventer or disconnects the sump pump.
Is there any forms that they need to fill out ahead of time to get on the list to make sure they get their funds or whatever?
Yes, there will be some forms. We have them in draft form right now, and I believe there will need to be a bylaw that comes to council, but we have the forms almost, they're 99% complete, just need to get them onto the website and available for the landowners. So that can be done very shortly.
Thank you very much. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, and just one other point, we did discuss at council that it could be backdated to the point where the storm took place. So it doesn't have to be after the fact. That was something that we discussed. So anybody did have an issue during the storm, they're eligible at this point in time, as long as they meet the criteria that Andrew was talking about. Very good. Councillor Westgate.
Just one little thing. It was coming into town from the north on Saturday night and our sign wasn't lit up. Do we have a problem there, Andrew, or do we know about it?
Thank you, Councillor Westgate. To my knowledge, I do not believe we have any issues with it, but we can certainly take a look and ensure that it is working as it should.
Councillor Westgate.
I know it wasn't working on Saturday night anyway.
Anything else, Councillor Westgate?
No, that's all I had.
Thank you very much. I've just got a couple things. I just wanted to formally congratulate the YMCA on their first year of operations at the East Lambton Community Center. I stopped by and saw Mike and some of his team on Saturday, and they've done a terrific job. And in my discussion with Mike, it's really nice to hear that the numbers are holding still. They're up to 540 members right now, and they've held that 500 plus ever since they've opened. So again, congratulations to them. They've done a super job, and we look forward to the second year. The other thing I want to bring to everybody's attention is that the Santa Claus Parade will be on December 2nd. And again, the start is always 10 a.m. There'll be some more information coming out on our Facebook page in the next little while. The group will be getting together again this Wednesday to discuss a few more of the details. So just so everybody has it on their calendar, December 2nd at 10 a.m. Thank you. Okay, I don't see anything here for staff items. Am I correct, Amanda? There is an update on a special council meeting. Amanda, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Mayor Case. So there is an item today for council's discussion. As you know, you've been circulated some dates in the hopes of scheduling a special council meeting focused on waste management items. And there would be a dual purpose of items planned to be brought forward to that meeting. One would be the presentation of the technical review team's 2022 annual report. And the other would be, we've had a request from Waste Management to complete a delegation, providing council an update on their environmental assessment process related to their proposed expansion. So just a delegation from them. Thank you to all of council who already provided me some feedback on dates. If I followed those correctly, I believe the preferred dates, Mayor Case, were either Tuesday, November 14th or Wednesday, November 15th. No councillors, except for Councillor Westgate, noted a conflict with either of those dates.
I believe I am not available on the 14th. I'm sorry. I thought I sent it in to you.
Well, Mayor, Councillor Morris, I may have missed that. So that would mean that the 15th is unanimously the best date. Thanks for that clarification. I will note Councillor Westgate is away for the week, so will not make that meeting.
Okay, so everybody is good at having that. We'll have it at our regular time, 3:30. Is that good with everybody?
Yes.
Very good. Okay, so that'll be, I guess you'll send out something through email as well, and you can put it in your book right now if you wish, council. So we'll just plan on that. Did you have another follow-up?
Maybe have a resolution to approve scheduling that meeting.
Sure we can. Let's have a resolution approving that special meeting. Council, who would like to do the honors? Councillor Morris and Councillor Manning. Is everybody in favor? That's carried. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, Amanda. So our next order of business is a timed event. It's the official plan and zoning bylaw amendments. We're going to come back to that at 4 o'clock sharp. So I'm going to take us on to number 8, which is staff reports. The first one is mixed commercial industrial zoning review. And there's a resolution a recommendation that goes along with that. Does anybody have any questions on this particular number 8A? Seeing none, there is a recommendation. How does council wish to deal with the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Manning. Thank you, Councillor. Seconded by Councillor Westgate. Any further discussion on this particular piece of business? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Let's go to 8B if we could, and this is the salt shed tender. And there's an award recommendation here. This was on our last agenda and we had the discussion, and one of the pieces that was discussed was obviously trying to take part of the project out to try to save a few dollars. At the end of the day, everything will be done in next year's calendar year anyways. And I don't know, Andrew, did you want to speak to this at all?
Thanks, Mayor Case. Yeah, just to add, so council asked to look into this further to see if we could remove the demolition of the building, and upon further investigation into the contract, there was a very, very small portion, which is outlined in the report, of $9,000. So very, very tiny portion, wouldn't really make that much of a difference. So we were hoping that we could take the additional 220,000 plus engineering and have it part of 2024 deliberations. So that's the addition to the recommendation we're looking for.
Thank you, Andrew. Did anybody have any comments? Councillor Morris.
Well, I'm still a little concerned at being 220,000 over budget. We do have the opportunity, because it is so much over budget, to retender it. Should we look at something like that? There was one bid that was disqualified. Is there more people going to be available to bid? Just a question. I don't have much experience on retendering, but I'm just wondering if it should be considered an option.
Thank you, Councillor. Andrew, if you're so kind.
It's always an option. It's unfortunately you never know when contractors are going to be busy. They don't seem to be slowing down, even though everybody thought they may. So there is a risk that you could retender it and it could be higher. So you're faced with that risk as well. So unfortunately, I can't answer could it be, but you have the risk of being higher as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Anybody else have any questions? Yes, Councillor Westgate.
Andrew, is the concrete around the bottom, is it any good? Can we use it to pile gravel or something inside there to push against? Or is it falling down too?
The large foundation wall is falling down too. So the entire west side of the wall is cracked. And I believe the east side is as well.
Yeah, I meant to get out and have a look at it and just see, but I didn't make it.
So just to remind council, I'm sure everybody's read it. We did put $1.1 million away in the last budget to deal with this project. I believe we're looking at a start date somewhere around April. Am I correct on that, Andrew?
That was actually the substantial completion. So they can get started right away.
Yeah, that's even better. Councillor Westgate.
Make a motion that we go ahead with the recommendation and go ahead with it.
Sir, do we have a seconder? Deputy Mayor Kallenberg, any further discussion on this issue? So the motion would be that Warwick Township Council approves the recommendation of Spree Associates to award Accuratus, is that correct? Accuratus design and build the contract for the Public Works salt shed for $1,390,500 excluding HST. And that required funding to support the project in the amount of 220 be included in the 2024 capital budget. I'll call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Okay, we have number 9, which is new business. And it's the Parker Drain petition. And we at this point in time would have to appoint an engineer to that project. How does council wish to deal with this piece of business on appointing an engineer? Councillor Morris.
I motion we get an engineer going on this project. Spreets usually does their business, so.
I have a motion to appoint Spreets. Do I have a seconder to that motion? Councillor Manning. Any further discussion? All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Takes us to the end of our regular business, and we are ahead of time. That was one of our fears coming into this. Did anybody else have anything else for new business today before we break here for a few minutes until we come back at 4 o'clock? Any other new business? Okay, seeing none, then we will take a break and we'll come back at 4 o'clock sharp and we'll continue on with the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment. Thank you. Okay, council is now 4 o'clock and we're going to carry on with our timed event, and that's the official plan and zoning bylaw amendments for additional dwelling units. I do have some duties here to perform. I have to announce the following. The next item on council's agenda is the holding of the public meeting with respect to council's consideration of bylaw to amend Warwick's official plan and zoning bylaw 121 of 2012 to implement changes to enable additional dwelling units within single detached, semi-detached, row house and townhouse dwellings. It would also enable dwelling units in an accessory building, garage. These amendments are to conform to changes made to the Planning Act through Bill 23, but also enable on rural parcels to allow a consistent ADU framework in the township. And now I'm going to ask the clerk the following. The method of giving public notice of this meeting and the date the notice was given. Amanda.
Thank you, Mayor Case. Public notice was issued in the October 12th edition of the Petrolia Independent of this meeting.
All right, thank you very much. Any person requiring further notice of the passing of the bylaws should give their name and full mailing address to their clerk before leaving the meeting. Any persons present who wish to make oral or written submissions should provide the clerk with their name and full mailing address. Also, all persons wishing to address the bylaws should ask their questions through myself, the chair. Now I'm going to proceed. The clerk will now read any written submissions. Amanda, have we had any written submissions?
There were none. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now ask the planner to give the report. Ken?
Thank you, your worship. Good afternoon, council. We have a presentation that was included. I'm wondering if we could, sorry, didn't mean to put you on the spot, Amanda. Sure. So thank you, your worship. We are here to do to have the required public meeting for additional dwelling units with council. As his worship mentioned earlier, the amendments that are proposed are playing a bit of catch up from the province's recent changes to the Planning Act via Bill 23. And it is really to bring your official plan and zoning bylaw into alignment, because the changes made through Bill 23 make the additional dwelling unit changes as of right, but then your regulatory framework has not caught up, which could catch someone in sort of a regulatory circle in order to proceed. It's important to understand that additional dwelling units are a great beginner form of housing. They're an option for those wishing to downsize, but also a mortgage helper for someone who is buying a new home that wants to or needs some additional income to help offset the housing costs. If we can go to the second slide, Amanda, we can start there. Actually, the next one would be even better. Great. So just for the sake of anyone who's beyond council, who's observing proceedings today, it's important to understand the top-down system of planning here in Ontario and why the changes in the Planning Act sort of govern some of this discussion. Ontario planning in Canada is a provincial responsibility. It starts with the province and then it gets delegated down to the municipalities. And so when the province makes a change in the Planning Act, we have to then update official plans at the county level and also at the municipal level. So the changes we're talking about in Bill 23 came about late last year. And these changes really conform to ideas and concepts expressed in the provincial interest in planning in the PPS. So if we go to the next one. So some history, you've already had additional dwelling units within your zoning bylaw and your official plan previously, because there was a Planning Act change some time ago that required municipalities to enable one additional dwelling unit within the dwelling types that his worship mentioned earlier. What your bylaw did was allowed for an additional dwelling unit within a single detached building. That was it. Or the internal conversion of it. So you could convert a building to have units, or you could then construct a unit. What Bill 23 does is it changes the math to allow 2 additional dwelling units, either in the building itself or 1 in the home and then 1 as a standalone accessory building, but no more than 2. So we go here. It's important to understand the bill changes took effect right away, and they override your official plan and zoning bylaw. So it's important for us to update your regulatory framework. Otherwise, someone who wishes to proceed could run into challenges. And one of the things that is in the legislation of Bill 23 was municipalities can't create a more restrictive framework. Now, that is really about the math that I talked about, like the formula of how many you can have, but it could be read to be creating even further regulations on how those units occur. So we need to update our regulations. And what we're doing today with the proposed changes will achieve that. So you've probably seen this graphic before, borrowed it from a past life. This is really just to illustrate what we're talking about in terms of additional dwelling units that have been enabled through Bill 23. So you have a unit within a house or in a basement, or it could even be on a second floor. Then we get into additional dwelling units that are independent of the home, that could be their own standalone building, that would be an accessory building, and then potentially accessory buildings having a unit above, or what's not shown is a unit attached. And that's really what Bill 23 is getting at. One of the key changes that we have to reflect is that your accessory building regulations really speak to buildings that are not occupied for human habitation. So this is part of that circle issue. What rules do we apply? Because if we apply the rules that exist today for accessory buildings, if someone wanted to build one above a garage, you now have a habitable space closer than what the building code typically sets as a minimum. And as we've asked Ms. Nada to be here, but as I understand it, once you get into that, you start seeing the building code requirements go through the roof in terms of safety and precaution. Most dwelling units tend to be at least 1.2 meters away. So the framework before you recognizes some of those challenges and attempts to deal with those. So we'll get into that in a second. So the best way to describe what's before you is that there's going to be some things that are mandatory, that are not, that council really can't change because the bill has set out these things and the province has set these requirements for all municipalities. So this is the math that I was referring to before about 2 additional dwelling units in a primary building. So you'd have your single detached dwelling, for instance. You could then add 2 additional units in that building, or you can have 1 additional unit in that single detached and 1 in accessory building. And that there's no minimum unit size. But then it also gets into you cannot require anything more than 1 parking stall. Of course, your bylaw requirements for the parking stall size would still apply, but you cannot limit the tenancy on an ADU on an additional dwelling unit. The other thing that was changed, though, is that there's no appeal of policies being added into your official plan for additional dwelling units, and that applies also to your zoning bylaw. So while there is an appeal period, really the rights of an appeal are limited. We'll go to the next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, 1 parking stall is the maximum that you can require, and it can be a tandem parking stall. And that's directly in the OREG that was approved with Bill 23. In terms of occupancy, there had been a historic concept that if you put a unit within your home, that there was a family relationship or an ownership relationship. That is not the case. you've probably heard us say we regulate the use, not the user. It's getting back to that idea. The other thing is that sometimes municipalities will set a date of construction of the primary dwelling. You'll see examples of that throughout the county for municipalities that have been doing surplus farm dwelling severances. They might set a date of the dwelling had to be constructed no later than this date, or at least by this point. That is not applicable in these changes. The changes that are proposed or that have occurred in Bill 23 impact lots within municipalities that have sewer and water. So these changes don't necessarily apply to rural properties, but to create a consistent framework, we are setting it up as if it does, because it makes sense. That was where the new updated provincial policy statement seemed to be going. And you can always over enable. So our recommendation to you is to just make it consistent across the board for ease of interpretation. Next slide, please. And yeah, going the wrong way. That's okay. That's all right. There we go. So now to get into the framework that has been brought to you, as I mentioned, consistent, rural and urban. So it'll apply to all properties in the township. ADUs can be added to a primary building, but only through internal conversion. So no additions to the building would be enabled if you're going through the ADU process. And that's to keep the feel of the community in terms of the visual impact. Now, keep in mind, council, this is what I would call a version 1.0. This is the first time we're getting into this. We've also recommended a 1-year review to come back in a year if the feeling is that that's too restrictive. And that's something that actually exists now in your rules that you have in effect for one additional dwelling unit. Then we can remove that. And we could also remove that later on if something comes up that council feels it's a bit too restrictive. New setbacks for additional dwelling units in accessory buildings, once again, to recognize that issue of human habitation and the proximity of these buildings to property lines, but also to recognize that if you have someone proposing a unit above a garage, that could create a privacy concern. So the ADU has to be pushed back to try to minimize those privacy and overlooking concerns. Next slide, please. Setting a maximum size in terms of the accessory building percentages, but also a maximum cap to recognize that rural properties, because they are unserviced, tend to be way bigger than an urban property. So using a percentage number doesn't really work, because then you could be talking 10% of a 30-hectare parcel. Well, do you want an accessory building that's 3 hectares? That's kind of big. So hence setting a maximum cap at about 90 square meters is a typical garage size. And that can be varied if someone wanted to go beyond that through the committee of adjustment. The other thing to recognize is that in a rural context, the ADU needs to be part of the farm dwelling cluster, which is basically the cluster of buildings that contains the residential component. The other thing I'll mention to council is that one of our previous planners who was working out of here had started these conversations long before the province began their discussion of Bill 23. And one of the issues, a number of the issues that came up related to fire and safety and civic addressing, so that emergency responders knew where to send people and where the additional units would be in a building. So where's the unit that's in the back, for instance. So we've included rules that address civic addressing, and a need to have a paved pathway from the parking to any unit that is in an accessory building. Obviously, there'd be a pathway if it was in a dwelling, so you go through the main door. But if there is a need for, if there's alternative doors being used in a home, they'll have to provide paved pathway that way, just to make sure that someone who calls 911, our responders know where to go. We've also put in rules that an ADU that is in an accessory building cannot be severed onto another parcel. And the same is true for even those in a main building. Obviously, if it's a serviced parcel, that you couldn't sever it off generally because the lots are down to that minimum size, but also keeping them out of the environmental protection and hazard areas. The one thing I will also add is that we've put a provision in related to additional dwelling units not being used as a short-term vacation rental and defined what that is based on some work happening in Plimpton, Wyoming. We put that in purely as a discussion point for council. You may want to consider removing it if you feel that if that's too restrictive. We wanted to put it in the bylaws simply to have a discussion with council today. Whether you want to include that restriction or not, what it would mean is that anyone who would want to do that would have to get a bylaw amendment to go around that if it's done through the additional dwelling unit rules. I'll be candid. Some municipalities feel that additional dwelling units should be open in all senses. It can be rented for long-term or short-term accommodation. Some are very adamant that they only want it for long-term accommodation. That's a conversation we can have as we go forward. And then, of course, as I mentioned, variances can be considered through the Committee of Adjustment for any of the numeric standards for maximum size, even the lot coverage of accessory buildings as normal. We'll go to the next slide, please, Amanda. Just going back to the discussions we had with residents, we had those open houses that some of you were able to attend. We had 3 of them, 2 in November and then 1 at the Moonlight Madness Festival here, and had pretty good reception to what we to our open houses, some great dialogue with residents and lots of feedback. There's been pros and cons noted in the feedback for additional dwelling units. So we very much appreciate folks coming out and giving their feedback. And just in conclusion, additional dwelling units are intended to be yet another option of housing within your township. They do provide great options for downsizing and multi-generational families. And what we've got before you will align with Bill 23. So that concludes my presentation, Your Worship.
All right, well, thank you very much, Ken. Appreciate the presentation. Now in this part of the process, we'll hear for those who are in favor of the bylaw. Does anybody want to speak in favor of the bylaw? Anybody from the public? Anybody want to speak that's opposed to the bylaw? Seeing none. Members of council may provide any questions or comments about the application. Deputy Mayor Kellenberg.
Just clarification, Ken. Section 3.8 of the bylaw 106. And up until this point, I didn't think we were allowed to do it, an ADU, unless it was attached to sewer, municipal sewers and water. I see that's changed in here, and you kind of went through it, alluded to it. So has that changed now, or that's just left for open for down the road?
So through Your Worship, your current framework actually does allow for the addition of an additional dwelling unit, whether you're on sewer or water at all. As I mentioned, the changes in Bill 23 are meant to really impact parcels that are serviced by sewer and water. And so if you are going, because this is really about enabling it across the municipality, we've written it so that if you are on sewer and water, then you must be on sewer and water. If you're not, then you must get the proper approvals to be so that your septic system and your potable water source can provide you enough capability.
Thank you.
Anybody else on council have any questions? Yes, Councilor Morris.
And I've been read through this a couple times. Does each unit need a kitchen and or bathroom?
So through Your Worship, they would be at their own self-contained dwelling unit, which is a combination of a food preparation area, kitchen space, a sanitary facility, bathroom, and then living quarters. So that's living room and bedrooms.
So that would eliminate somebody coming into town, buying a house and just renting the rooms out basically and calling them units. Because each one has to have its own facilities like for eating, for kitchen and for bathroom. Am I understanding you correctly?
So through your worship, what you're speaking to is a boarding house where I buy a home and then I rent a room to Johan and I rent a room to Trevor and I rent a room to Amanda. So they're paying to rent rooms in that one building, but there is only ever one kitchen facility. So there is only ever one dwelling unit. This is about taking a building that has one kitchen, one dwelling unit, and then adding another kitchen and another living room sanitary facility that then creates a second or potentially third.
And the owner does not have to be related to these people or live in the building. Is that correct?
Through your worship, that's correct. It goes back to that we regulate the use, not the user.
Does anybody else have any questions for Ken? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Ken. Appreciate it. Okay, seeing there's no other questions. The public meeting is now concluded. Council has 15 days from this meeting to decide whether or not to pass the bylaws. Council's decision will be mailed to those who have asked and requested a copy. Any person or agency may appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal in respect to the bylaw by filing with the clerk of the Township of Warwick no later than 20 days after the day of written notice was given. A notice of appeal must set out the objection to the bylaw and the reasons of support of the objection, plus the applicable fee to the Ontario Land Tribunal. With respect to the official plan, should council pass the official plan amendment, it will be forwarded to the county for decision. Anyone wishing notice of this decision of the county will need to contact the county planning office. Thanks very much for attending. There is another piece of business that goes along with this council today, and there's a recommendation along with this process. How does council wish to deal with the recommendation? I will read it out. That Warwick Township Council approves bylaw 105 of 2023, adopting official plan amendment number 10 to the Warwick official plan, and that the CAO clerk be directed and authorized to make an application to the County of Lambton for approval of amendment number 10 to the Township of Warwick official plan, and that bylaw 106 of 2023 be approved, being a zoning bylaw amendment to amend regulations for additional dwelling units, and that staff be directed to monitor and level of additional dwelling units activity in Township of Warwick to monitor regulations for 1 year and report back to council. How does council wish to deal with that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Morris, seconded by Councillor Westgate. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you.
That bylaws 105 to 107 of 2023 be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed.
Because I jumped the gun, everybody's in favor, I'm assuming? Yes, thank you. I'd like to have a motion to adjourn this meeting then, please.
Absolutely.
Deputy Mayor Kellenberg as always, and Councillor Morris, I think I saw your hand up. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much.